In traditional web development, like JSP or ASP in .NET, the client side has to fetch a brand new HTML page for every click or every interaction with the web page. We cannot blame this because HTML pages are prepared on the server side, either in Tomcat or in .NET Framework. The server has to send a complete HTML page to the browser. People start thinking, can we change the way we design web pages? Can we only ask for the data and the server not sending us an entire page, only send the data we want, and we can use front-end or browser-side technology to render the changes, to render this data? And what will be the language to do this on the front end? You're right, we're using JavaScript. So if you look at this picture down here, this is how we decouple front end and back end. So when user clicks something or there's a user action on the web page, JavaScript uses listener to capture that event. And JavaScript is going to make a request. So we're going to make this request in JavaScript, not using the A tag or href or action in HTML. JavaScript is making this request to the server. Once the server receives this request, the server will process this request, get data from database, process it, do all the business logic that you need. Now, instead of returning a JSP or HTML, this Java server, in this case Tomcat, will only return the data in the format of JSON. I have shown you JSON before. Later on, we're going to have a detailed discussion of JSON, but this basically is the format of JSON. So this is a JSON object. In this object, there are 3 lines. Now each line represents a key value pair. They are separated by comma. So once JavaScript receives this JSON data, and JavaScript can use its DOM to update some tags in HTML. So if we make a request, we no longer to have a full page reload or full page refresh. Website development strategy that is decouple front end and back end. So now the back end no longer needs to worry about how to assemble the data into a HTML file and send it to the browser. All this server needs to do is to parse the request, get the data that the user is requesting, process the data, do all the business logic calculation, and then send back the data in JSON format. And the front end can focus on the rendering part, the presentation part. And we do not let the front end talk to database or process the data. So it's a very nice separate of concern. Let me show you a real-world example of using this new website development strategy that is decouple front end to back end. So the front end can send a request asynchronously behind the scene without interrupting the current rendering of HTML. And the Java server receives this request, talk to database, prepare the data, and send the data in the form of JSON to JavaScript. Now, once JavaScript receives the new data, and JavaScript will dynamically modify the contents of HTML. We're going to use Google. And Google has a very good example of how these things works behind the scene. So I have turned on this network. So we're trying to monitor the request and response. I'm going to activate this search. As you can see, when I activate search, Google is trying to provide me some searching suggestions. Okay, I'm going to search football. Now pay attention to the right-hand side. Let me clean this a little bit. I'm going to type football, but this time I'm going to type it letter by letter. F, all right, O, O, T, B, A, L, L. All right, every time I type a letter, that's a change event on in this input tag. Remember, here is the input tag. And JavaScript can detect that event. Now, every time we have a new letter, if you look at here, Google is sending my query string, Q equal to F, then I type O, then FOO, FOOT, FOOTB. So every time I type a letter, JavaScript on this page, it's sending a AJAX, well, spoiler alert, right? AJAX request behind the scene without interrupting my page. I'm not saying any page refresh. So for example, now I'm in football. That's the last request. If I click this request, I want to know what is the response from the server side. Now on this page, you can see we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There will be 10 data returned. Football games day, football game schedule. On the return, we have them in JSON. Football games today, football games, football schedule, and so on and so forth. So what happened is, let's go back to the picture here. Every time I do something, user action is a click, or I type something, or my cursor moved, or something like that, JavaScript can detect the event using its powerful DOM manipulation. Then JavaScript will send a request behind the scene. Okay, we don't realize that to the server. Okay, I'm not sure Google is using Java Server or Tomcat. And Tomcat server receives this request, parse it, and send back, in this case, the searching suggestions. There is another important benefit of using this decoupled front-end and back-end website development strategy. So let me show you the example. As you all know, in this course, we picked HTML, CSS, and native JavaScript as our front-end technologies. And we pick Java Servlet as our backend technology. And if we're using this decoupled front-end and backend structure, then they will talk to each other using JSON. So what if your company says, hey, we don't like Java. We're using Ruby on Rails. So can you modify your project? So let's say we already have a project that JS talks to Java. Can you modify a project so that your JS talks to Ruby on Rails? All right, no problem. Simply just swap out Java and swap in Rails, as long as Rails knows how to handle JSON and how to send out JSON format. And you do not have to change anything in your front end. No single line change, because they're loosely coupled. The front end does not depend on the back end. Now, what if you are a Python company? How do you modify your project? Very simple. Keep your front end not changed, and you can swap out and swap in Python. So changing backend should never affect your front-end code. But this is different if you're using JSP. If you use JSP, you got stuck on Java technology. All right, let's come back here. Let's say your company says, we're tired of using native JS because, based on your homework and project, using native JS or pure JS, somebody call it vanilla JS. That means pure JS without any library or framework. It's very tedious, right? So we're going to use a powerful library or framework called Vue.js. So can you modify your project? Fine. Swap out native JS and swap in Vue.js. And this would not affect a single line of code on the server side because the front end does not depend on the back end and vice versa. Now, what if a company says, we don't like Vue.js, we want React from Facebook? No problem. Swap out and swap in. And using the same backend. Your backend stays the same. So this is a summary of all the popular front-end technologies and the backend technologies. Of course, the list goes on and on, the list goes on and on. But they're all using the same structure, is decoupled front-end and backend. So you can make whatever changes you can make here, and this change will not affect the backend. And you can make all the changes you want to make here on the backend, and the change would not affect the front end. It's a perfect, beautiful, decoupled architecture. We introduced the decoupled front end and the backend structure. So front end no longer depends on backend and vice versa. They exchange data using JSON data format. I also introduced an example, a concrete example, that is Google search suggestions. For example, here is the web page the front-end part. When a user types FOOTB, JavaScript detects this change event because user inputs some letters, and that changes the content of this input box. So JavaScript will launch a request with a query string equal to FOOTB to the backend. And here we'll assume Google is using Java and Tomcat as their server side. And Java on the backend will talk to database and grab top 10 most popular phrases that start with FOOTB. And then return as JSON array. In this case, this notation is JSON array that has 10 searching suggestions. For example, football games today, games, schedule, field, so on and so forth. Once JavaScript receives those response data, and JavaScript is going to use HTML DOM, document object model, to update the page. In this case, we're adding 10 entries under the input box. So user can use the down key or up key to select a suggestion and complete the search. How does this happen? We discussed many things about how to use JavaScript to change the DOM, DOM, but we never talk about how to use JavaScript to launch a HTTP request to server and receive data from server. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use JavaScript to launch a AJAX request to Java and then receive response from Java server. Of course, this applies to any kind of server, Python, Ruby, and so on.